Hi, everybody. I'm Emer Hines, and I'm from Text 100, and I am moderating this panel on the future of digital content. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, Paul, but putting an Irish woman as the last panelist moderator between now and the cocktails is really not appropriate. But anyway, we'll make it as stimulating as possible. In introducing the panel, what I'd like to do is just have each of you introduce yourselves and what your area of focus is in terms of your role within your individual organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you to NewsWhip. My name is Sarah Fisher. I'm a media reporter for Axios. I cover mergers and acquisitions, advertising, and media technology.
I'm John Keefe. I'm a bot developer and product manager at Quartz in the Quartz Bot Studio, where we're working on conversational interfaces and machine learning for news.
Hi, I'm Ashish Patel. I'm the Chief Insights Officer at Group 9 Media. Group 9 is a fairly recently formed holdings company that has 4 brands, Now This, The Dodo, Thrillist, and Seeker. And I lead our audience development and analytics teams.
Hi, I'm Gilad Lotan, and I lead the data science team at BuzzFeed. We're a team of analysts and data scientists embedded across the company, building tools that make sure we collect the right data, that we store it in the right ways, that give different editors superpowers, and then also power features across our owned and operated properties.
My name is Renan Borelli. I am a senior editor of digital storytelling at the New York Times. That basically means I'm part of this this task force that is helping the Times transition from being a print newspaper to a digital-first destination, and everything that entails, from strategy to training to all that good stuff, working with the writers and editors in the newsroom.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Thanks. So what I wanted to do in just opening up this discussion, because there are many different directions we can go in terms of content and publishing, is just to reflect a little bit on the last year and the unprecedented times. I know that's an overused word, but given that everything that has happened in terms of publishing, particularly around social platforms and the changes that I don't think any of us really would have fully anticipated happening, I just would love to get your perspective on how you're dealing with that, and what direction are you headed in terms of social platforms and the role that they're playing in you getting your content out to your audiences. Anybody want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I'll start. Group 9 and our 4 brands are a little bit different than a traditional web media company. We do have healthy O&O audiences on our sites across our network, but we're primarily focused on building video and distributing that natively through social, so directly through social. So with BuzzFeed, we're some of the biggest players in terms of purely socially distributed video. It's been, I would say, a challenge for us. Well, I guess we were a first mover with Now This and Dodo and 14, and kind of like really bringing video into social platforms. We definitely had a first mover advantage and built some scale there. I'd say that what's powered our growth since that moment has been our insights and optimization process. Ours is really focused more so on, as opposed to recreating viral hits, really looking at the bottom of our stack, our bottom performers. From my team, finding some kind of correlation that we can translate with the production teams, and then drive new testing and meaningful best practices that should work on these platforms. I'd say that this process has been difficult for us because of the amount of data that you can receive from these platforms. And so what we've been really working on is taking our process as it is today, a very manual process that can't scale to the amount of video we're putting out every day, and really working on automating that. So data access from API from the platforms. We're using a computer vision software to create a new metadata layer and trying to drive recommendations in a more automated way. So the biggest challenge in the year for us has been access to data, and what we will be able to continue to get from the platforms. Obviously, with Facebook, and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, they're being very cautious with how much data that they offer out. So how we're approaching that is really kind of turning back and trying to collect as much first-party information as possible. So we're aware that it's very risky to a certain extent to kind of have as much consumption as we do on social, but that's where we see our audiences are. So we're going to continue to kind of figure out what we can while the platforms are constantly in shift.
Sarah, do you have a perspective on?
I don't, because I don't do audience development for my company.
I can add to that. So I'd say at BuzzFeed, we're acutely aware of what we get from every platform. And I think that as a publisher, especially as we sort of continue into this uncertain future, you really have to understand what you're getting and whether your investment is worth it, right? And a lot of that can be fueled by data. So the better data you have, the better understanding you have of audiences, the better you can quantify really what you're getting. So an example is typical, on average, a session of a user coming from Facebook is significantly shorter than sessions of users coming from other acquisition sources. So if we invest in Facebook, we have to take that into account and know, well, if we're running programmatic advertising on site or other form of revenue streams that are impacting users coming to our site, here's a trade-off, and we're investing, but users coming from Facebook are worth a fourth of other types of users. So taking that into account, specifically when we're thinking about sort of where we're investing. And also, like I would say in many cases, we have to understand what we're getting. So for BuzzFeed, there's a lot of focus on experimentation and learning. And so what can we learn about audiences, about formats, about content? What's a frame that's successful? And we run a lot of content experiments, like really quick, rapid experiments to understand what are the things that are working with certain audiences, and really dive in and invest in the ones that are working. One example from fairly recent is Tasty, which is a really massive food sort of brand that sort of really ballooned in the last 2 years. Emerged from a content experiment, really sort of successfully grew initially on Facebook and now across all platforms. But at a certain point, we sort of pointed it towards also our owned and operated. So now there's a Tasty app for a specific user base from this massive sort of international Tasty network of users who are making the recipes on a daily basis, submitting tips, ranking recipes, and engaging with the rest of the community on the app or on the specific site that we built. So we really have to understand, okay, why are we investing in this other platform? And then is it worth the investment?
I think in the last year, in these unprecedented times, Quartz has been known and continues to be known for listening to its audience and really adjusting to the audience. And one of the things we heard from our audience for over the last year was that, especially in our global audience, because we're a global brand, that a lot of people were getting a little overwhelmed by the Trump news. And we actually built into our app, which is kind of like a little chat app for news, a Trump snooze, so you can take a 24-hour break from the Trump news, unless it's really big. And that's partly the sign of the times, and partly really listening to our audience. It was a much requested feature and something that we were able to put in pretty quickly.
Right. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think like one of the big takeaways from everything that's happened is how important it is to have diversified like places where you're programming your content out to. Like we were going to do a project this year where we were going to sit with all the different guests and talk about all the different levers they could pull to promote their stories and get their stuff seen. And we realized that, there's a couple platforms that drive like the majority of traffic and readers, and everything else is just sort of, your mileage may vary. And we realized that we would have much more luck just writing stories that would be better for digital. Like if we could basically shift people's habits to write, headlines that look like they were meant for digital instead of meant for a newspaper and just like put on the internet, like that would have a much more beneficial result than like figuring out like how are we going to do Instagram stories and can we turn that into a traffic drive. Like we just realized that there's so many different platforms, there's so many possible things you can do, and I think the most important thing for us is to just like write stories better.
Right. And just kind of building on that whole notion of the data, though, I mean, I think right now, certainly from a communications perspective, everybody's talking about audience of one and the ability to understand through the data exactly who we're communicating with. That's hugely beneficial, but on the flip side, there's also this concern that your audiences are just talking to each other. They're consuming all of the information that reinforces their own point of view, as opposed to traditionally being in a position to, to read and gather perspectives from others. So, how granular should we go in data, and what concerns would you have, or what are the big opportunities from your perspective in looking at that data and using it to drive how you publish content?
I mean, I'd say that when it comes to commerce, you want to go really direct. When it comes to things like news, it's a little bit tough because there's a wide discrepancy right now as to how far we should be assignment editing for the American people. Should we be giving them something that they might not necessarily want to consume, but we think is good for them to consume? Should we be giving them something that we know that they want to consume, but might not be the best thing for them to be an informed citizen? No one really knows. And I think the key or the trick is to figure out a way to just do both. Whether you have some sort of way of getting to a consumer with information that they like about a particular topic, but at the same time still serving them the most relevant information about that topic. It's like a delicate dance that every newsroom has to do, but I think a really sound editorial newsroom will recognize that it's their duty to have that balance and to reach the consumer on both fronts. And any newsroom that's just trying to reach the consumer with the news that they want to be getting is kind of waning into clickbait a little bit, and that's a dangerous place to be.
There's another role for the data we're exploring, which is if you're providing information in not just a personalized environment, but a personal platform like SMS text or Facebook Messenger or a smart speaker, then you're getting to be into somebody's world, into the world where they communicate otherwise with friends and family. Then you can also be smart about not just what you're providing, and maybe not what you're providing, but when you're providing it. Mm-hmm. So we think really carefully about when we send a push notification out over Facebook Messenger. We don't want to do it when you're sleeping, or maybe not when you're at work, or maybe we want to do it when you are more likely to be interested in talking to us. We don't want to annoy you, because the moment we start to annoy you, you're going to turn us off. So we're looking at different ways to use the data, not so much in the content tailoring, but the tailoring of the delivery.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, and you'll continue to see with the responses here that, data is a very broad term, right? So it really depends on the context and the goal. So for e-commerce, getting down to that single individual person makes a lot of sense. For media, that you'd have to create quite a bit of content, or personalization ultimately just becomes a targeting challenge at that point. I think it was a really good point to bring up that you can definitely read your data incorrectly and get into kind of these clickbait patterns. If you see that this type of bombastic headline is getting a lot of traffic back, that you can effectively dilute your brand to kind of hack for that growth. So the way that we look at it is not down to a user level personalization, but to an endpoint that people are on our Snapchat channel for a different reason that they're on our Instagram channel, and a different reason than on our YouTube channel. Let's try to understand what works on these platforms, and what these the best way these people want to see our stories, but don't let them dictate what we want to say. We're brands with point of views, and we need to maintain that as well.
Something that I'm very excited by, and something we're very much investing in, is adding much more flexibility into our ranking systems. So if we're starting from a place where there's a lot of automation, so it's like multi-arm bandit system that ranks and sort of moves content around on site based on how users are engaging with content, which has this sense of global maximization. So if we're saying, well, if we care about shares, let's make the system maximize shares. So whatever users are doing on site, will get the most shared content to stay on top the most amount of time. But it can't get as nuanced as it should. And what we're working on are ways to integrate signals from our editors and curators. So ways to have more flexibility in how we think about ranking and optimization. And I think generally that's a direction that we should be heading as an industry. So leveraging some of those inputs as features to this semi-automated system. Some call them human-in-the-loop style systems, where you leverage automation where it's powerful to get scale, and maybe get even to personalize towards certain segments of your user base, but also take into account a flexible set of signals from your content creators and editors.
Yeah, like I sometimes call it the holy grail, like the ability that maybe one day I'll be able to sign into the New York Times and it'll know exactly what I want. Like I want, there's a new column from Amanda Hess, or like here is a new NBA story, and I would love to get there sometime. I think the data is there. Like these guys are really smart, like much smarter than I am. I feel like the problem that I run into more, this is another cliche that we use a lot, but like it's not about like raising the ceiling about like what we can do with the data. It's about like raising the floor and sort of figuring out how we can use some of this data and turn it into like actionable insights, because there are really smart people out there, but if I can't explain it to an editor who is leading an entire section, then like I'm not going to be able to do anything with it. And so it's been, I've been dreaming big, but also trying to like stay small and like teaching people and understanding like, hey, if you write an explainer, you might get a lot of search traffic, but if you write a story this way, you might get a lot of social traffic. People might share it, and even that sort of distinction in like baseline data like helps a lot in translating that message of like the really smart data stuff to like the way that it plays out editorially. And I think that's sort of where I've found myself mostly, is just trying to figure out how to distill the really smart things you can do with data and be able to turn that into a comprehensible message that I can take to anybody.
So building on the data piece and just thinking about the technology and the application of the technology, I'm always fascinated with this notion of man plus machine. And John, I'd love to get your perspective on what can we expect in the future in terms of how either AI or bots are changing the landscape in terms of publishing content, and where is it all headed? I mean, we as communicators will have a relationship with journalists, but do we have relationships with bots in the future? And to what extent can that be predictive of news that's around the corner that we may not see?
With the caveat that I've never been able to predict the future of news, I will say that I think that these personal platforms, your Alexa, your Facebook Messenger, are just things that are going to be in our life in some form or another. If any of you have a smart speaker and a child who can talk, you know that there's no friction between them. The kids know how to get the things they need very easily, and their high little voices are very understood by Alexa. So I think that things that we talk to are going to be in our world. How news and information organization fits into that and fits into the different platforms and everything is, I think, super interesting and far from being solved, but I think it will be a part of our life. I like to say that despite the fact that we do look into natural language processing and the ability for some sort of machine learning to help with that delivery, the real secret to Quartz's bots are amazing humans. We have a team of people who are writing for our chat platforms and for our bot platforms, and it is that writing that is makes it stellar and enjoyable and makes you want to return. So I don't think the human element is going away anytime soon. I think I'm most excited about how machine learning might help reporters and augment their ability to do stories. And we've seen great examples of that from BuzzFeed, from ProPublica, and others. I think you're going to see a lot more of that once reporters get a sense of that, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was headed with the future piece, which is this notion that you can start to see, if machines can help us see patterns, then actually it may tell humans something that we wouldn't naturally understand was going on. At BuzzFeed, how big a role is technology playing?
Yeah, so I mean, I come from tech. BuzzFeed is my first job in a proper like publisher or media company, and to me it feels like a tech company inside. So there's very much an emphasis on building our own technology. I'd say many times we build things we shouldn't build. We should just use existing services, but we just like to build stuff. And I think with regards to artificial intelligence, the story that we would like everyone sort of envisions these robots and cyborgs and like intelligence sort of taking over. But the real story is really around like better forecasting, optimization, ranking. So we've used neural networks in many parts of our publishing layer and are increasingly finding advantages there. So one example is, let's say someone writes a post that has hot dog versus legs, right? It's about that meme, right? Everyone's seen the meme, hot dogs, legs. So the post is written in our CMS. Where does it go? Does it go on the front page? Does it go on the BuzzFeed Animals Facebook page? Does it go on our SOML Instagram account? We have hundreds of Facebook pages, all these Instagram accounts, all these YouTube channels. So we have just all these places where the content could go, and historically that was a human decision, right? And at this scale, it's impossible, given the amount of content that's created and all these channels, to make the right matches. And so we have systems internally that take the piece of content, that learn from historical sets of data, and then performance data from audiences that we've captured over time. So given all these previous posts, and we start comparing this post to say, well, it has the word dog in it. Is it really about animals? Well, because the relationship between the words, and that's where neural networks come in, where they really help you understand the context of a word within the larger frame of a sentence. And so making these matches and giving you prediction where if you post it to this Facebook page, it'll probably optimize for the KPI that you want. So I think in the publishing layer, there are a lot of places where we all should be leveraging neural networks a lot more, especially if we're operating across multiple properties and we have historical data. And then for the sort of, I guess, the further future, I think there are places where we could start to see much more automation in terms of creation. I totally agree that the creative process, you'll still want humans in the loop, but I think there'll be interesting ways in which these systems could really give editors superpowers, give ideas, or sort of bounce off each other in ways that are much harder to do now.
That's more of the context that we're building for at Group 9. It's kind of on the latter. So essentially what Gilad's talking about, but applied to video. So that's where we have a computer vision layer where we're trying to build another layer because there's not that much information other than watching a video to tell you what's inside that video. So to scale this out, that's essentially where we're driving to. But the way that we think about technology internally, it's all to power creatives. It's to essentially inspire, to give a better context or framework that if you're building this video for Facebook, here's some considerations that you should think about versus if you're building this for Instagram. And it's even, I think just very recently, we're seeing that it's more of an evolution beyond like one format for one platform, that when you're thinking about, building this for Instagram, here's what you should think of, here's themes that might work. And then pre-publish, we try to predict points of potential optimization for our producers. But what we're seeing now is that as opposed to kind of like a one-to-one, like this goes to Instagram, we're seeing that formats are evolving across multiple platforms. So stories as a format is living on Instagram, Facebook, and Google, YouTube, et cetera, like that audio agnostic, in-feed, auto-placed video is really working on Facebook and Twitter. Every platform is ordering series. Every platform has a live format. So to kind of take it beyond, we're trying to give our producers recommendations based on all of this information we have on what worked and what didn't work in the past, and then giving them ideas on, if you want to choose this kind of story, something that's a little more short form, it's good for a stories format across all these platforms.
Yeah, I tried to build a bot at my last job, and it sort of sucked. Like, you know, we tried to like strip it down and like, all right, we know that we're not smart enough to like make this feel like an AI, so we'll make it just like a largely an article delivery service and try to just make it really streamlined. And like, even though we did all of that, people still tried to like talk to it like a person. And we're not there. Like, it's hard. It's really hard to do. I think like the best personalization that I get is like sort of like via push alerts, like, and I don't feel like many people are doing that well, but like you know, the BuzzFeed News app, you can get like categories that are very specific in terms of the topics that you want, and so if like you want push alerts about entertainment, you can get that. My favorite is the Bleacher Report app, which is just like miraculous because you can just tell it a bunch of things about yourself, and it'll know that, hey, you know, the Capitals won the Stanley Cup, and Alexander Ovechkin is doing push-ups in a fountain outside of DC with the Stanley Cup. Like, it knows that I want to see that because I do. Alex Ovechkin is nuts, and I'm like shocked that more people haven't really embraced like that type of personalization with like push alerts and their apps, like let alone even bots. Like, I still feel like we're scratching the surface.
So when you think about breakthrough content, or, you know, breaking through the noise that we're all experiencing, is there, you know, in previous panels we talked a lot about humanizing storytelling and so on. Are you seeing trends right now in terms of this is clearly going to break through the news cycle in some ways over others at Axios?
I think we found a very high value in actually breaking news.
Right.
And so there's been such a barrage of news outlets that have popped. You can get your news from, 40 different websites if you wanted to, and just good reporting we're finding breaks through really well. I think the other thing that breaks through really well is having a distinct voice for each platform, understanding which nuances work well where. Our head of audience development is in the audience right now, and he'll tell you that the way you frame a video of Trump waving goodbye to Air Force One, on Facebook you would say something like, going into the weekend like in the wave. On Twitter you'd say something more journalistic and formal, like Trump just took off from Air Force One. So you really have to know the platform and then customize for that. But we found that by far, there's nothing you could do to manipulate a story or to tailor a story that makes it more effective than just breaking the news yourself.
Right.
I 100% agree with that. Like, what do I have to tell Maggie Haberman? Nothing. Like, she's going to break the news. It's going to take care of itself. Like, there's nothing I can help with there. There's nothing better than actually going out there and doing the work and getting the scoop. And, like, all the promotion in the world isn't going to change the fact that, like, if you get a good scoop, people are going to share it on Facebook and Twitter. They're going to find it if you have the news. And that ultimately, it boils down to that.
So for those that are not breaking news necessarily, is there a format? I mean, you talk a lot about video, but what's emerging as being this is the thing that we know is going to break through?
Well, I think breaking news, if you kind of take a up level at one level, it's original content, right? It's something that's something that you own. It's IP. It's something that you created. So we really believe that cutting through the noise is around original stories and telling really good original stories. I'd say that a lot of, again, like our two of our brands now, this and Dodo, were really early with social video, and we had a massive first mover advantage. But now this and Dodo were the two of the first people to put text on screen on video, which you see all over the place. And early on, that was kind of enough. That was enough for us to be distinct. You can tell that it was us, and now it's getting really noisy, and that format is kind of commoditized. So our reaction to that is that we have to just build the best stories. I mean, we kind of see the parallels to the cable industry and through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where there was some entrepreneurizing first movers that really got on, like ESPN, HBO, et cetera. They built a lot of audience early on, but essentially when people saw that they had a viable model, anyone that could stand up a cable channel showed up. And the quality of content across cable went down. And the winners in cable today are people with the best shows. So we see that pattern is repeating itself. Like, this is just a new set of pipes.
Sure.
I would add owning certain beats Let's say something that, so BuzzFeed has been successfully investing in breaking news as well, and we're seeing sort of the benefits of that, but also, for example, the misinformation beat. So how do you identify false information? And we have, depending on the platform, we actually have very different frames and way we tackle this sort of idea of misinformation. So on site, we would have a lengthy story about something that's spreading and sort of effectively fact-checking it, right? On Instagram, we'd have like a fake news quiz, right? And so you tap through the quiz and you try to see if you can get a few answers correct, right? And so really, depending on the platform, we sort of explore the same beat, the same idea, in different ways and really try to own that. And I think BuzzFeed's done an amazing job with that specific line of storytelling.
Yeah, one of the things I'm trying to get people to think about more is the story after the story. So like if we get a big piece of news and it is going to change the conversation, okay, like we have that first story where we broke the news, but what we should also be thinking about are what are the 5 or 6 pieces that are going to come after that, and what form should they live in? So if we get big news about Michael Cohen and somebody breaks a scoop, but we might also need an explainer, we might also need a fact check, we might need to make a video, we might need to make a vertical video for Instagram, we might want one of the reporters to go on the Daily the next day. Like it's about figuring out, okay, once you have the piece of information, what are all the different places you can put it, and what are all the different ways you can contextualize it and sort of adapt ultimately that nugget of news at the center of the story and figure out how to make it travel as far as possible on all the platforms.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think that's a really good point. Figuring out what other story you're inadvertently breaking with your first story is a way to double the traffic. So an example was one of the reporters in our team broke a story about how Trump hates Amazon and wants to go after Amazon. Well, the story is about Donald Trump, but the next big story to come out of it was Amazon's stock plunging. And so that became itself a huge breaking news story that got picked up probably by even more outlets, the fact that Amazon was in this stock rut because the president was saying this. And so the best way for us to capitalize on the traffic is not just to break the first story, but to identify which story you're inadvertently breaking, be the first to pick that one up, and then to publish that one at the same time or right after. So it's almost as if like once you hit publish, you're never actually done.
Yeah. Can I open it up for questions to the audience? Sure.
So I think you guys touched on it a little bit with things like fake news and fact checking and things like that. I was also reminded of this one action that Elon Musk took when publishers tried to get on him about stuff, and talking about the credibility of publishers. He was saying he was going to make a rating system that essentially would like look at every publisher and like people would be able to rate them. So do you see credibility in publishing as something, as another trend in the future of digital content to look at?
Yeah. So specifically for Now This, but for all of our brands, trust is a metric that we're trying to figure out how to move. So we quarterly do surveys on kind of our own brand health metrics just to see what people are thinking about us. Do they know us? What do they feel about us? And the thing that we see is, so we survey against our own brands, and we survey against a bunch of other traditional as well as like kind of other new media and digital publishers. And what you see is that the brand, like there's a high correlation between kind of trust, favorability, awareness, et cetera. But a lot of that kind of we believe is like the formula to longevity. So I think that in an ecosystem like today where you can make a lot of choices, having a lot of people think that you're credible and trust you is exceedingly important. It is, though, difficult to kind of cut through the noise with super factual reporting at this point because of just the way the platforms work, the way that sharing, like the psychology behind sharing. But yeah, I'd say it's very important for us at least.
It's like a very like Black Mirror-esque like idea that we're going to have ratings, but Elon, I don't know, partially that came as like a response to news that he just like didn't like about himself. But, you know, Facebook is actually trying to do that very thing right now.
They've already done that.
They've already done it. I just came from a panel with like Campbell Brown and some other people, and they're talking about like trust, and they're going to try to figure out trust and adjust the algorithm based on trust, but we don't really know how they're doing that, and we don't know much about how they're figuring it out. Like, it's really hard to do, I think, and I don't know. For me, like, sort of, people are going to come at us like a million different ways, and sort of my thought is like, you just do the best you can, report the stuff as much as you can, try to get the story right, and sort of the rest will follow. I don't know if I can think too much about ratings and Elon Musk and stuff.
I think it's true that it is important to dive in and talk about publicly, sort of criticize where needed the algorithmic systems that have baked in sort of notions or ideas of trust. So Facebook specifically announced a few months ago that they've added this sort of layer of trust into the way they rank news on site, right? And the way they calculate trust is by having some 1 or 2 part question survey with specific set of users. Does that actually reflect trust? Like, we have no idea how their methodology works. Like, they don't publicize anything, right? I mean, there's always a blacklist or a whitelist somewhere for domains. Google does the same. YouTube does the same. So when we have these systems that are that effectively are black box systems that there's no transparency around and are effectively directing people's attention, especially around news and information, it's really important to criticize where possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's different types of trust too. I used to work at MTV News, and you know, like, I trust maybe we were covering politics for a while, and I trust the Times' political coverage, but if I want to know about like Ariana Grande and Pete Davidson getting engaged, I might trust MTV News to cover that one, maybe more than the Times.
Well,
so there's different types.
And we also have to be really careful that this isn't just about trust. This is to the point of, if somebody doesn't like the story and they're a big enough media figure that they actually can say, I'm going to block them. I mean, that's been happening for the last 20 years, right? You know, Bill Gates will talk with certain journalists, but not with others, which, from my perspective, in the world of free press and a democracy, that's a really dangerous way to go. So I think there's a degree to which we have to push back on it. The guy at the back there, a question.
I have a question. We're talking about AI and visualization. We're all talking about walled gardens, changing data, we have access to data. How valuable would it be for, how much would it power your recommendation? Let's say an individual consumer can sort of control their own data and basically, rather than getting data from Facebook or something, sort of permission to use. Would that help your AI engine?
I mean, I think in general, you know, the way we start to work is ingest more and as much as possible, and then try to figure out what actually matters there. I mean, I think it's kind of a difficult concept, at least for us, where again, like most of our distribution is social. But yeah, I mean, if we have like mechanisms where people can opt in and give us information, we'll use it. So we have our own audience panel where we picked we have a large group of people that are like super fans, and then people in the panel who are not super fans as well, that we survey on occasion on, you know, it's self-reported, so we have to kind of understand it's self-reported, but yeah, getting kind of more individualized feedback in any way, shape, or form is helpful. But yeah, for some mechanisms, if like for our site, for example, not actively thinking about it, but there may be a future where we're like, you know, here's what we're using. Let us know what you'll let us take, and then we'll work with that.
I'd say it really depends on like for what purpose. I'd say by default we'd say no, we don't want more data, and many times we choose not to collect data where we don't need it. There's no purpose. Most users who consume BuzzFeed content are not logged. We don't have a persistent ID or view of users. Cookies refresh every 40 days in median. And so, and I think that's okay. Like we don't need to know everyone's names, emails, and phones. If we are investing in e-commerce, it probably helps. So for that purpose, perhaps. If we are investing in a subscription style business, for that, it probably helps. But generally, for personalization, I think like there's more than enough that we could do without personal information. So yeah, so I'd say it always comes back to why, and not really trying not to collect for the sake of like having data.
I would sort of second that and also say agency over your own data is awesome and would be great. How many people here in this room have gone in and adjusted your, MailChimp settings or read the privacy policies? Maybe more here than usual, but if you're not active, that's not going to happen in a large scale. So then we, as information providers and people who are, we hope, trusted with providing you information and holding your information, what can we do that doesn't require active participation in that way? And I think that's the big challenge.
You? Sorry. Your question? Yeah.
Do you find lookalike audience modeling useful to
I could say, lookalikes could be useful, especially when you're running certain paid campaigns, like on Facebook. If you sort of create a certain audience, if you're very active on Facebook, you have different levers to say, okay, everyone who viewed food videos across our network, and that's an interesting audience. But especially in cases where it's smaller than you would have liked, creating a lookalike where you get from the platform, you get this sort of additional sort of view of additional users who are similar, but you don't have direct touch point. You don't get their information, but you can promote content to them. So I'd say for paid campaigns, it's definitely been a useful lever.
Probably time for one last question.
What do you think about interactive stories and especially the future of digital content? They can be useful to gather data for audience.
Well, in our conversational interfaces, they are 100% interactive. There's no, it's you talking to the device or to the bot. So I think actually there's a lot of interesting things to come in exactly that. The data that you could potentially collect in that process is probably pretty big. But I think that in the tradition, again, we're the ones who people are we hope will trust. Do we want to even collect that data? What would we use that for? And then, what are the upsides or downsides of having that? It's not just what we would do with it, but what somebody else might do with it if they got a hold of it. So I think, I don't know, I think there has to be a measured approach to something like that, but I think the interpersonal interactions are super valuable.
For Inauguration Day, we had an emoji submission, like a way for our readers to submit emoji reactions in like emoji sentences, and getting that data and analyzing it was actually really interesting. We put a blog post on what we learned, like what is the Trump emoji, for example, and how are people reacting? They're all moving to Canada, apparently, through emojis. But that was a fun, sort of engaging way to sort of get in touch with audiences, and then we put out analysis afterwards.
What was the most used one?
It was the angry orange face. So you can guess what that represents.
At first I thought you meant like interactive, like a high tech page or like article page that we might use on a feature, and I was like, I think those are going away. And it once I realized what you meant, I think they sort of tie together, because I think like fancy interactive articles I think are gonna end up going away because they don't work in Google AMP, and they don't work in Apple News, and they don't work in Flipboard, and they don't work on Facebook Instant Articles, and I think it's just gonna get more and more stripped down. And I think what it made me think of is you don't really need it to be like there's the old school way of doing it. Like I think of Vox's Sarah Cliff, who is trying to figure out what people are being billed for on their hospital bills because it's kept really secret and you can't get that data. And the only way you can get that data is if somebody literally sends you their hospital bill so you can see how much that hospital charged for an ER visit, and it differs from place to place. And she's just like asking people to send her their bills, and it's sort of the only way to do something like that. So I think it'll get more low tech. It doesn't need to be necessarily interactive. Sometimes you just gotta hustle.
Yeah, to the low tech point, I've noticed that in the need for speed, people want to be able to have control, which means the full entity of whatever it is they're expected to consume loads like that, and then they have to control over the speed at which they consume it. This is a problem for video because you often can't scroll through fast enough. You can't fast forward fast enough. But with plain text, you can determine whether or not you speed read it, you slow down, you savor it. And so we're finding that, at least I'm finding, Ramiz can yell at me if I'm wrong here, but we're finding that plain text can be some of the most interactive way to engage people because it meets their need for speed in a way that some of the really heavy interactive articles that takes time to load and to scroll through, it just doesn't meet the demands of the fast-paced consumer anymore.
Yeah, just to kind of like, to build on that, like I think it's all about contextual appropriateness, just where's the location, what's the user doing, are they scrolling in feed and trying to consume something fast, are they on YouTube and you can engage them for a longer period of time. And I think that's what Quartz really nailed with their bot. Every publisher tried some shape or form of a messenger bot or something, and ultimately it was just like shooting links out, right? So what they did was think about what does an actual text message conversation look like, and they built a product around that. So it's really just kind of understanding the surface, why people use those surfaces, and then just bring the appropriate story to that medium.
I feel like we're only scratching the surface, but I do think we need to conclude and go and have a drink. But can you join me in thanking this fantastic panel?